Hey friends, hope everybody's doing well. I've got a little desert creek for us to paint today with some nice fall foliage going on, as much fall foliage as we get in desert Arizona anyway. So, we've got very simple blue sky, got that yellow tree kind of in the middle left, and then we've got this creek that runs back into the distance, and you can see the edge of the canyon wall back there. You've got this sandy bank on the left and the right, and you've got a nice yellow reflection of that tree in the water. And that yellow tree, that bright yellow tree, and the reflection of that tree in the water are going to be the focal point of the painting. So let's get into the value study and see how I broke this scene down into 3 values: light, middle, and dark. So the lightest values are represented by the white of the paper. Middle value is this middle value color that I've painted in Payne's gray. And then the darks, again, Payne's gray, but just a thicker mixture. And you can see that I have created one big shape with this middle value color. This shape all connects and touches, except for a few spots here and there. This creates a very powerful, simple, easy to read composition. And then within this big shape, this big connected middle value shape, I've added darks to break up that shape a little bit and add some interest and heighten the contrast in certain areas, particularly right here. I really like this is going to be very bright yellow for that tree, and then this is going to be that dark, cool shadow. So that's going to be a very interesting area of contrast right there. So not only looking for contrast in light and dark, but also in tone, in warm and cool colors. And then also soft and hard edges. So you can see I've included this background hill, this tree that flows over to this cliff right here, up into this hill, into this tree, down into the shadow. Most of the water is going to be middle value. And then this side of the bank, which is damp, is going to be darker to distinguish it from the dry sand. So let's jump right into it. You know the drill. I need to wet down my paper on both sides with this sponge. I'm doing this so the paper lays flat. What I mean is I'm wetting both sides. Here, let me start over. I'm wetting down both sides of the paper for a few reasons. One is so that the paper stays as flat as it can on my board without me having to tape it down. And then another advantage of doing this is it gives me more time to work wet into wet. I live in a very, very, very dry climate, so my paper dries out very fast. And although that has helped me learn how to paint faster and more decisively, I just want more time to work wet into wet, because I really like that magical blooming flowiness that it creates. Did not wet this side of the paper enough, so I'm going to re-wet this a little bit. I'm kind of trying to get it to be an even amount of wetness across the paper, so I'm just using the drier side of the sponge to smooth it out a little bit. If there's any area that's wetter than another, it will cause the paper to buckle because one area of the paper will dry faster than the other, and watercolor paper expands when it gets wet, so that creates tension, which makes the paper warp. There's a little physics lesson for you. Bet you weren't expecting that in a watercolor video. Alright. So just planning ahead a little bit. I do want the paper to dry out just a touch more than it is. I'm going to get some yellow ochre ready to go for that beautiful fall colored tree. Just going to leave that up in the corner here. I want that yellow ochre to be nice and vibrant. I'm going to add some cadmium yellow too to lighten it up a little bit. I want this color to just pop out. I'm going to mix this color as part of the wet into wet, and it's going to bleed into the sky and create these beautiful soft fuzzy edges. This tree here also has a few spots of yellow, though not as intense as this one, but I might, you know what, split second decision making right now. I'm going to make this tree as vibrant as this one, I think. Kind of lead your eye down there. And it'll create a nice little balance between both sides of the composition, have that same color here and here. So that's what I'm going to do. I need to get this yellow off of my brush because I can't have this being mixed into the sky color, because that would make my sky green, and I don't want a green sky. The water itself is a little stained yellow, but I don't think it's going to make a difference because it's very diluted. So just going to mix up a very basic sky color, my usual cobalt blue, and then whatever the fuck, cerulean blue. And then make it more of this cobalt turquoise light as it gets toward the horizon. I like to start at the top and work down. I want the top of the sky to be darker, so I'm going to darken that up with some cobalt blue. It's something I've been trying to practice with my skies, is greater contrast between the top and the bottom of the sky. I accidentally painted over some of the area that the yellow of the tree is going to be in, so I need to get that off. And you can do that while it's still wet. You can take a paper towel and just kind of lift it up. And this is a fun way to paint clouds too. It's not a technique I've used that much, but I really should practice it more. So we'll leave that area blank so that we can paint those yellow leaves in. I'm trying to create a color gradient as well in the sky. Make it a smooth gradient is the idea. So we'll make that even lighter down here. And there you go. There's the sky done. Drop in that yellow right now. I'm going to drop it in down here too, so that I know not to paint through it. It'll just help with that a little bit. Let the edges of that bleed right into the sky. It will fuzz and bloom and do all kinds of pretty things. Basically will paint itself. It's one of my favorite things about watercolor is how it can paint itself. And that yellow is going to get painted over and darkened up quite a bit. I'll make this tree yellow as well. All right. I need to start dropping in these cliffs. I want to push this hill right here back farther than this one, so to do that, make it a cooler color, something like that, maybe a little bluer than that. Maybe both, it's fine. Now drop that in while this is all still wet so that the top gets nice and fuzzy. That will help portray the illusion of distance and push this far into the background. I'm exaggerating the depth of the photo. At least that's the idea. Drop in some warm colors here and there too. I'll leave that highlight on the tree trunk there. And there's a few pure white branches up there that I'm going to have to either scratch out with my fingernail or paint over in gouache, which is fine. Nothing wrong with gouache. Gouache is great. One of these days I want to learn how to paint just with gouache. Alright, I'm going to just drop in some darker yellow for this dead foliage right here, and in fact I can mix some blue right onto the paper and start hinting at some of the green of that foliage that's back here too. Even though this is all light value now, I can at least set the stage, and this process is all about setting the stage. And this is getting too dry, so I need to make it a little wet again. See what I mean? The paper dries so fast, even with both sides wet. It's so dry here. It is, after all, a desert, so things are dry and dusty. But we also have places like this where there's creeks, and there's actually if you walk down this creek and you go around the corner, there is a waterfall back there. An actual flowing waterfall. Pretty crazy. I love going to places where you can find water in the desert. I think it's fascinating, because the ecosystem completely changes. It becomes more vibrant, there's more plants. Makes sense, because there's more water. And you'll have these ribbons of green that cut through the desert, with all the trees and things growing along the river. It's very beautiful. So this is just kind of a bunch of different warm colors for this sandy bank. See how all the colors are blending together and creating little miniature gradients everywhere? I can drop in some of that burnt sienna and start indicating the change in color where that gravel is more wet. We'll just drop that color on the other side too. This is for the sunlit areas of gravel, and then the shadow areas will get painted over. I will actually start dropping in some of the shadow color over here, but this color will work well for the top of the cliff as well. And generally this cliff will be a warmer color, at least the sunlit areas will be. And that will help it bring it forward and push this one back. I'm not really worried about the details in that cliff, or really in this one. This is just acting as a backdrop for this tree. So you should only put your detail where you want your viewer's eyes to look. Because they're going to look at where the detail is and where the highest contrast is. That's why you don't want to put tons of detail into your backgrounds, because then your viewer's eye will be drawn to the background away from probably what you want them to be looking at. I mean, sometimes if you want to do a more unusual composition, you can draw their eye to the background and put your point of interest in the background itself, but usually it's not the case. Alright. Just start dropping in some of that nice dark sky color for the water. I'm going to mix more of that brownish color into it as it comes closer to us, because you can start to see through the water down to the bottom. The water becomes more transparent the closer to you it gets. It's kind of a nice thing to have in the back of your mind when you're painting water, rivers, and things. It helps just make it look more realistic. Nice vibrant colors today in the first wash, a lot more vibrant than I usually do. Just kind of changing things up a bit, keeping it interesting. And then that blue, there's a gradient in that blue. If you look closely at the water, you got this dark blue in the foreground, and then as it recedes into the background, it gets more of that teal color going on. And some yellow for that reflection of the tree right there. Let it all blend, let it all fuzz. Cool colors for this area because it's all in shadow anyway. I like that sharp shadow that cuts across that tree. Okay, first wash is basically done. Now I need to let this dry so I can start on the second wash. So let me do that and I will be right back. Alright, now that the paper's dry, we can start on the second wash. Which will be middle values. I'll start painting that foliage up here. So now my value study comes in very handy, because I have a roadmap of exactly what to paint, at least a very rough idea. And this eliminates a lot of the guesswork from doing this. It makes watercolor a lot less stressful if you've already painted the scene once before in your value study. Painting around that trunk, want to preserve that highlight there. And the value study also gives you a chance to test different ideas out and be more playful. And you can be more free when you're doing your actual painting, you can experiment more. So I'm going to be scratching out some texture for this grass with a fingernail. And also hint at it by doing these little tiny brush strokes with the tip of the brush. Just hinting at that texture. Once that dries out a little more, I can do some scratching. And I'm going to darken a few areas on that hill just a little bit. Might re-wet this area just a tiny bit. So I want this to fuzz a little bit. I made the whole thing middle value in the value study, but I want there to be more separation between this foliage here and that hill. Yeah, it's still too wet to scratch out just yet, so I'll just keep moving on over this way. Actually, I'm going to paint the darker areas of that tree, the brownish yellow color. Try to do kind of a stippled effect. A lot of dry brushing, giving you the texture of the leaves without having to paint each individual leaf. Yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. So, got some shadows back here. I need that area to dry a little bit because that's a very sharp edge of that cliff that I need. Moving up into this tree. A lot of this area will get painted over again with the dark pass that we'll do later. I was going to paint around the trunk, but I might do something different to get that trunk in there. Might just scratch it out once this dries more. Moves into that dark yellow, that shadow side of the yellow. It's still yellow, it's just very, very dark. And I want you to still be able to tell that it's yellow. See how this shape is all touching itself, it's all blending into itself. And then we'll come back with gouache and paint some pure white next to this shadow. And that will be the highlighted side of the trunk, or the branch, rather. See if it's dry enough to scratch yet. Yes. Perfect. So you can see here, I can show some of this tall, dead foliage that's going in front of the greener foliage in the background. It's a really easy way to do that. Just scratch it out with your fingernail. Okay, part of it is dry enough and part of it is not dry enough yet. To come back to that in a minute. I need to continue painting this cliff. Very sharp contrast going on up here. Most of it is in shadow. Creating some areas of warm and cool within that shadow. And again, most of this area will get painted over again with the dark pass. And there we go, right there, where you can have that brilliant yellow contrast against the shadow of that cliff. I love finding ways to do that in watercolor. It's so satisfying. The way you can make things shine and glow in this medium is just insane. Showing some of those cactus poking up there. That area is dry enough now, I think. Having this cliff come down in front of that hill in the background is just going to help add a layer of separation between these two features and further emphasize the depth that I want to portray. I love making scenes look very deep, like they go on for a long way into the background. Now this here tree needs some texture. It's looking a little flat. I'm kind of doing a little flicking motion at the edges of the canopy, just so you can see the texture of those leaves a little easier. Let me darken up this area just a little more, right here. Beautiful. Man, that is just such a cool effect. I love that. The shadow continues in the foreground. There we go. That's what I wanted. Now I can scratch out a lot more easily this grass. Kind of trying to imitate the shape of some of those plants where they fan out from a singular point. I sprayed down that area a little bit so those shadows would fuzz out, make them more soft shadows. Now I'm just painting in the details in this creek, trying to indicate the shape of some of these rocks. Yeah, I'm going to have to go paint some of those rocks back in later. Definitely going to have to use gouache there to get the highlights of the rocks. Really easy way to get some gravelly textures, just tap like this. can indicate that area of damp gravel. This kind of burnt sienna color. Let that blend right into the water. And kind of roughen up the edges of it to indicate some of that texture. Just kind of adding splotches of that color here or there in lines that are leading towards the vanishing point, at least implying that direction. Here's where you can see that it's still yellow even though it's in the shadow. We're painting around it with this even darker color, and that's helping it stand out. Even make that pop out more than it was. I can have some highlights on these branches. Now, gouache is the opposite of watercolor in that it dries darker than when you first put it on, and watercolor dries lighter. and accentuate some of the blades of grass on this thing here. I like how it breaks up the background a little bit with that shape. Do the same thing with a few areas over here for this grass, but I need to be really careful not to go overboard with the gouache. If you add too many highlights, it'll ruin your painting. Same with if you add too many darks. You gotta use your highlights sparingly. Just enough to give the idea of what's going on. So I'm just hinting at some of these rocks that are poking up through the shadow. Alright, well, I think that'll do it for this painting. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope you learned something. I hope to see you on the next one.